Hey guys, welcome back. What we got going on today is I'm going to show you how to repack wheel bearings without having a wheel bearing packing tool. How we used to do it back in the olden days in the 80s with just a pair of gloves and some grease. Alright, so what I got is I went and got myself a tub of grease at the hardware store, auto parts store. Got my wheel bearing, cleaned it up a little bit. Now, if I was back in the shop, I would use my parts washer. I would have got all this dirty grease out of here. Alright, let me give you a better angle. Alright, so what you're looking at is my rotor, where the bearing's going to wind up going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a big wad of grease and put it right in the palm of my hand here. What I'm going to do is this cage on this wheel bearing. First of all, before I even do anything, I inspect the wheel bearing. These little bearings, I usually check to see if there's any scarring or scratching or anything on them. A lot of times wheel bearings, when they go bad, they'll make a really bad humming noise. These weren't making any noise. But if you're driving down the road and you hear like a humming noise, sounds like you have like knobby tires, and you turn to the right and it goes away or it gets louder. But you can make it change pitch by turning the steering wheel. It usually means you have a bad wheel bearing. So what I do is I take it and I try to catch some grease in the cage. And I keep trying to mush it through the cage until I could see it starting to come out. So I got grease starting to come out of my cage. That old dirty grease is starting to come out. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to get it in that little groove by like taking little bites of it. And I'm packing all these bearings with brand new grease in them, so it'll roll better for a long period of time. And think about this bearing, it's got to hold up a lot of weight. Got to hold up probably 1,000 pounds or so. Make it roll. So you can see my grease coming through my cage. Move it a little bit. Taking little bites. Go this one last area. A lot of grease going through there now. Now once I got it packed, what I do is I take some of this little bit of extra stuff, and inside here it's called the bearing race. I usually put a little bit of grease on there. Take some of this dirty stuff away. Take some of this new stuff and put it back in my jar. Now when you're rolling down the road, you don't want to have this leaking and being thrown all over the place. So what you need is a grease seal. So this little grease seal gets tapped into place over here. There's a little rubber seal in here that keeps it from getting past the spindle. Now of course I probably did not get myself a hammer. Nope, I'm good. Alright, so I'm back with my hammer. I got a ball peen hammer here. And I'm going to start tapping in a circle until it goes flush. I don't want this falling off. Alright, now I got my dust boot back on. And now I got a repacked bearing in there. So this bearing should be good. Another 20,000 miles or more before it has to be serviced again. So with these hub type rotors, this was part of doing the brake job, was taking the bearings out, re-greasing them, putting it back together. A lot more work was involved in doing this type of brake job than there was with the floating type rotor. Alright guys, see you next time. Hey guys, we're back in the garage today again, and we're working on this 71 Camaro of mine. We're going to wind up putting the brakes back together on this, and I'll teach you some tricks on how to make the brakes not squeak. These cars were known for squeaky brakes. Alright, let me show you what I've done so far. So as you can see, it looks a little bit different. I wound up cleaning the spindles up, and I wound up painting them in the dust shield. And the other thing I did was painting my calipers and make them look good when they're going down the road if someone looks through the rims. Now, if you look at these two calipers, they look exactly the same. How do you figure out which one goes on the left and which one goes on the right? Well, sometimes they're labeled. Sometimes on the back of the caliper they might have an L, for left, and they might have an R for right. But in case they don't, what you go by is the bleeder screw. When you put them on the car, the bleeder screw has to be facing up. So see how they're both like this, but on that one, if I put it on, the bleeder screw would be facing down. I would never get the air out of it when I had to do what's called bleeding the brakes when we're done. So now I know this is for the right side of the car because when I put it on, bleeder screw will be up. Okay, so let's work on getting my rotor on. So in the last video, I showed you guys how to pack bearings. So my bearing is packed and I got my grease seal on. Now what I have to do is I have to slide it on and put the outer bearing on. So this just slides onto my spindle. Now I got to grab one of my bearings that I packed, called an outer bearing. So again, I'm going to get a little greasy here. So I get my outer bearing on there. Then there is a washer. Now this washer here, it's got a little notch in it like a key, like almost like our crankshaft on our small engine, so it doesn't move. So I slide that into place. Now I have to get my specialty nut, which is called a castle nut because it looks like the top of a castle, so we're going to have to put a cotter pin in it. So get this started to be threaded on. I like to use a vice grip on this, but I can't seem to find any vice grips in the shop. When I get back to school, I'm going to have to grab one to use. Channel locks got left out in the rain. They're kind of stiff. Alright, so let me tighten up the castle nut. Now this is something you don't want to run in with a socket and make it too tight. These bearings, if you make them too tight, they don't seem to spin too well. So the rule back in the day when these were a very common type of brakes was you'd go until there was drag, which I have now. See how it's like stops? And then you back it off a little till the cotter pin lines up. Now there's less drag in it. Find the cotter pin. This is what a cotter pin looks like. I'm going to bend it so my nut can't come loose. Now my lighting isn't so good, I got to find that hole. There it is. Now I push my cotter pin all the way through. Use my wire cutters. Kind of pull it through. Then the cotter pin is like split into like two pieces. And I'm going to take it. I'm going to bend one half one way and the other half the other way. And I'm going to wind up trimming some of the excess off. I'm kind of tapping them flat. Now see, by having that cotter pin on there, this nut can't spin off. Even though it's loose and allows this to spin, it won't back off. Oh, sorry, that was bad camera angle. So once again, I pulled the cotter pin through, bent the tabs into place, and that cotter pin keeps the castle nut from backing off. So the next thing I have to do is put my dust cap on. And I just tap it into place. Alright, so the next thing we got to do is my brake pads. These are the pads that came off the car. So this is our friction material, which used to be really bad stuff when I first got into business. It was made from asbestos, and it was killing all the poor old guys that were teaching me how to be an auto mechanic. It got in their lungs, and for a good 10 years I was working on brakes that had asbestos in them, so I get worried about it every once in a while. But see all this friction material? Usually when this friction material is the same size as the backing plate, your brakes are worn out. Now on the inner pad, it's got this warning indicator. So when the friction material winds up, that the rotor starts hitting this warning sensor, it makes a high-pitched screeching noise. These were good indicator. What would happen is people would be driving around, they wouldn't hear anything, spring would come, they'd roll down the windows, and all of a sudden they'd hear this thing screeching, and we used to get a lot of brake jobs. Now if you look at this friction material, got a lot of dirt in it. This car hasn't been on the road in a long time, so what I'm going to have to do is clean off some of this friction material. I'm going to use some sandpaper. Now I used to have problems with customers complaining about squeaky brakes, and I would wind up hitting them with a little bit of sandpaper, get any like metal fragments that are stuck in the material, would get it out. And then there's some coatings you can put on it that would actually make it a little bit better too. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it on the sandpaper on the floor, just go back and forth a couple times, try to expose some new friction material. Alright, so it looks a lot better. Gonna do the same thing with this one. Alright, so these brake pads are called bonded. They're kind of like glued to the backing plate. And then these old brake pads, there used to be also riveted type ones. And people would wind up wearing the pad down into the rivets and would wind up scarring up the rotor really bad, would put grooves into the rotor. Now this one's good, but man, rotors used to be very expensive. Now they're really cheap. Like you can probably go out to the store and buy a Honda rotor for probably 10 bucks. These rotors back in the day used to be like $70, and that's in like 1980s money. People would like freak out, oh my God, it got into my rotors, and be like, oh, bill's gonna be expensive. And nowadays, it's like people don't even service rotors anymore. They don't even usually cut them. Like I teach some of the kids in my class how to cut rotors, but most places won't even cut rotors anymore. In another video, I'll show you how to use a micrometer and mic a rotor and see if it's within machinable spec. Alright, so now we got our caliper. What I'm going to wind up doing is bolting it to the hose. Now what I wound up doing is I wound up buying some new brass washers for my banjo bolt so I get a nice good seal. So I got to put one on this side. I'm going to get you a good camera angle over here of the hose. So this is my hose here, and my banjo bolt goes through it that way. Now if you look on the back of the caliper, it's got like a little notch in it. That's for the hose to go through, kind of hold it in place. Kind of a hard angle to do it at. I'm trying to keep you in frame. I'm going to change the camera angle again. So maybe you can get an idea of what I'm doing here. So now what I got to do is put my other brass washer I bought, put it on my hose. So one on each side, that causes like a good seal so we don't have any leaks. Leaks in brakes are really bad. They cause you to have no brakes. Pedal goes to the floor, pistons don't move, car doesn't stop. Alright, so I got started on with my fingers, and I'll just slide it in here for a second so I can get some leverage on it to tighten it up. Turn my steering system. It's also another good thing when you're doing brakes. You should turn the wheel all the way to one side, get you a lot more access to the back of the brakes. Alright, get that nice and tight. Alright, now that I got that tight, I can start putting my brake pads in. Alright. So this is my inside brake pad. Has a witness mark of the piston on it. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize right here, so we have a little bit of less squeaking going on. Now it has a clip on it called an anti-rattle clip. That helps from not having squeaks either. Anti-seize, man, you get it all over the place. I'll wind up looking like the Tin Man by the end of the by the end of the day. All right. So I got a little bit of anti-seize on there. Install it in there. Okay, it's in there now. Nope. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my other pad. I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize on the backing where it makes contact too. A little bit of anti-seize in there. And I will wind up sliding this in place. Alright. So now let me change camera angles. Alright, now that I got my pads in here, I'm going to make sure that I have no loops in my hose. I've seen guys do that. They have them all twisted up and then it doesn't brake properly. I remember working at Midas one time, a guy came in our parking lot, his tires were smoking. He just had a brake job done down the street at the Goodyear. It was causing the brakes to stay applied on the one side of his car. Alright, so I slide it in place. Now what I got to do is put my slide pins in. Get my 3/8 Allen socket and tighten them up. Alright, so she's tightening. Now before I get it fully tight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this one gets started. Things could possibly not be lined up. Sometimes they need a little tap, get through the front O-ring of the caliper. Alright, now that I got it snug, I'm going to turn it like, say I'm at 3 o'clock now, I'm going to try to turn it to 5. Nope, 4 o'clock. I'm sure there's a torque spec on them, but most mechanics, when it comes to these bolts, they usually don't put a torque wrench on them. Now, some modern day brakes have a bracket that gets bolted on. Now those, I make sure I always put a little bit of Loctite on. Usually torque spec on them is about 90 to 100 foot-pounds, because I've seen those bolts come loose. Alright, so basically what we have is everything now mounted. I still have more to do to this job because I'm converting this car from manual brakes to power brakes. I'm not running a very big camshaft that required me to have manual brakes. So now I'm going to have vacuum, and I'm going to make this car more of a street car than a race car that it used to be. Even though it's going to be making some big power, probably still going to make like 600 horsepower, but going to be a little bit more streetable. Alright guys, till I see you next time.